Hello, fellow YouTubers. Good afternoon. This is your main man, Teddy T, with another series of my videos. Today, I want to talk about a couple issues. The main one being these mass shootings that just happened very recently, the one in El Paso, Texas, and the one in Dayton, Ohio. Okay, and I want to start off by saying I honestly do not, and I repeat, I honestly do not believe that President Trump is personally responsible for these shootings. Let's get that out the way right quick. Get that out the way. He's not responsible personally. But I see what the point of some people are saying because of the divisive rhetoric. And sometimes I feel like I'm in the twilight zone because when he does these press conferences at the White House, he says this stuff and it sounds like he's, saying, like basically the media's treating me unfair. They're not reporting fairly. It's improper what they're saying about me, yada, yada, yada. Then he goes to the rally and it's a whole different story. It's a different story, and then he attacks and he says this craziness about the Democrats. Well, let me just school some of you people because this is ridiculous. Okay, the reality is that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party share blame for these conditions under which we live, and it's just absurd to me when I hear an African-American person get on here and say, oh, you're going to vote for that Democratic guy from Baltimore, and he's the one that puts you in the living conditions that you're in, and you're voting him into office. And I go, wait, hold it. Use your common sense. First of all, think about this, folks. Think for a second. Just use your brain for a second and think clearly. Number one, the conditions of these various cities across America are not one man's fault or responsibility. It is the fault and responsibility of both parties, and it's actually even the fault of some of us. And before everybody gets all upset, let me explain what I mean. First of all, I'll break it down for the us part. We have people in our community who do not take pride in the very community that you live in. Okay? And I see it every single day when people go to the pizza store or go to the poppy store, as they call them on the corner, and they buy these items from the poppy store or from the pizza store or from whatever store that they're going to. And they come outside and they unwrap whatever that it is that they're eating, and they just throw the wrapper on the ground right where they are. And you get person after person after person after person doing this. And then you get this outcry of, oh my God, my neighborhood is dirty. My neighborhood is rat infested. My neighborhood it's the council person's fault. It's the mayor's fault. No, you have to take some responsibility for yourself and say, guess what, folks? I'm not going to drop that wrapper that I just brought my hoagie or my cheesesteak or whatever you brought. I'm not going to drop that on the ground. What I'm going to do is that trash can that's on the corner right there, that's where I'm going to place that wrapper. That's where it belongs. The city of Philadelphia even went so far as to install solar-powered trash compactors on various corners in busy corridors. So in my neighborhood, I counted at least 10 on various corners throughout my neighborhood that is easily accessible by walking up to it, pulling the stupid handle down, and using the same energy that you just used to drop it on the ground to drop it in that basket. And when you throw it in that basket, it makes a noise and it compacts the trash. And then once a week, the trash man, when he comes around to pick up our regular residential garbage, they send a guy out with the truck to pick that trash up as well, thereby making it more possible to have a cleaner neighborhood. How about that? That's really amazing to me. And I heard a lot of the backlash initially when these things were put up, because initially they were only placed in Center City, and everybody was saying, oh my God, they're only concerned about Center City. They didn't put any in. So they put them in the neighborhoods. Now, another issue is concerning the trash thing is right outside my door. I have 2 trash cans right there. And I still see people throwing wrappers and cans. And I even have recycling buckets. My fence is 4 feet high. If you're at least 4 feet tall, you are aligned with my fence. There is no reason that any person who is 5 feet or over should not have a problem throwing a soda bottle, glass bottle, or wrapper into the trash. It is ridiculous. But every week I'm outside my house sweeping up bottles that were dropped, sweeping up trash. I even watched the kid one day and I said something to him. He had went to the pizza store and got a couple slices of pizza, and he just threw the box right there. Took the piece of pizza out of the box and threw it right there. And I says, there's a trash can right there. Oh, I'm sorry, old head. This is the conversation we're having. Oh, I'm sorry, old head. I didn't mean any harm. Okay, can you pick that up and put it in my trash? Oh, sure, old head. No problem, no problem. But why do I have to do that? And then, so then that means that by him doing that and putting it in the can, that's less work for me, so that my property doesn't become the neighborhood eyesore, because I'm on the corner. I have a corner property. So my property is the representative property. The first property you see when you walk on the block. So why wouldn't I want my property to be clean? Because it's the representative property, correct? I want it to be clean. It's the only thing that makes sense. Only thing that makes sense to me. So that deals with that. Now, I want to address the mass shootings issues. Now, I'm going to say this, and I'll probably get some kind of backlash, but it's okay. I survived 22 years of being a police officer in the city of Philadelphia. I can survive a little bit of backlash, so that's not a problem. So I'll get to that history. I served 22 years on the local police department. I saw shootings, not in the sense of mass shootings, in the sense of 20 people shot at one time. I've never, ever encountered that. I've never actually encountered an active shooter situation in a school or anything like that. So this stuff is kind of new, but it's been going on. But I saw people shot from head to toe with an Uzi. That's ugly. I've seen rapes, robberies, assaults, burglaries. But this mass shooting thing is stirring up a bunch of nuts who are trying to stress this thing about the Second Amendment. And I'm just trying to say here that the Second Amendment is not an entitlement for wingnuts and crackpots and fruitcakes to go out and just shoot people with assault weapons. The Second Amendment was not written for that purpose. It was written for the right to residents to keep and bear arms to protect themselves against government overreach and tyranny. Okay, government overreach and tyranny. It was not meant for you to go into a Walmart with an AR-15 or an AK-47 or an Uzi or even a Smith & Wesson 9mm or a Glock or any one of those weapons to walk in there and just shoot as many people as you possibly can before either you get shot or someone tackles you and takes the gun away from you, which has happened in some of these situations. So let's keep the nonsense out of this conversation, because it's absurd to insert the Second Amendment in cases of mass shootings like this. And then I tend to be a type of person that I speak out, and I'm not afraid to speak out. I just speak out. And so some folks wrote back comments to me on YouTube, and I'm sitting here reading these comments and I'm going, you have got to be kidding. But one person wrote me some nonsense about, well, you're not keeping it in perspective because mass shootings happen not as frequent as people being shot, hundreds and hundreds of people being shot across the country every year. And mass shootings only happen. And I said, well, in this year alone, according to what I have heard, and some of these shootings have been televised dramatically and some just haven't, but there are over 2,400 mass shootings this year in 2019. And that's just ridiculous. There is no Second Amendment person who's going to be able to justify that and say, oh, it's okay, though, because guess what? Mass shootings, we're still way behind everybody else on mass shootings. So it's okay. Don't worry about it. No. That's nonsense. Okay? That's absurd to say that, well, guess what? The mass shootings ratio is only 5-1. We're only 1 out of every 5 compared to places like Mexico, or compared to Guatemala or Honduras, or you can name any country. I'm just using those countries. You could say Somalia, Honduras, you could say Mexico, you could say Haiti, Punta Cana, any country you want. Just name a country. It doesn't matter the name of the country. I'm just saying that there's no way you're going to sit there and tell me and explain to me that it's okay because we're behind. Like, as if, well, if they do catch up to those countries, then what are you going to say? Oh, we finally caught up to Mexico. Now we should be outraged. Are you insane? That is ridiculous. That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life. But yet you have these people saying this nonsense. I can't believe I'm hearing this. This is absurd. It's completely absurd. It's completely absurd. But that's okay. If that's your opinion, you're entitled to it. Just like I'm entitled to my opinion. But my opinion, frankly, is being on the front lines of the carnage on the streets and seeing those things happen to people. I don't want to see any more mass shootings, let alone any single shootings. We have, I'll give you a couple scenarios. One is we had a Philadelphia police officer who went into a gaming store to buy his son a present because his son had gotten good grades in school. And his father was proud of him, and he wanted to show him that because you achieved something, I'm going to reward you with a game. Simple thing, right? A lot of people do that. Some people reward their kids in different ways. That's another way. I'm okay with that. Anyway, so he goes in the middle of a raging, it wasn't really a raging snowstorm, but it was a snowstorm that day. And this officer went into the store, and these two nuts came in to rob this store. And when they saw the officer, they opened fire. And the officer knew that he was in a situation where it was hairy. And unfortunately, the police officer lost the gun battle and lost his life. Because these two nuts who had been in and out of jail for years and were known to the police and had guns And you're going to sit there and tell me that the Second Amendment allows these nuts to have handguns and walk into a store and rob the store of the hard-earned money that taxpayers like yourself and myself work for every day to buy something affordable for our kids or to buy something affordable for ourselves. You're going to tell me that the Second Amendment has given you, this nut, the person, to the permission, to go into this store and rob someone, and if he encounters security or a armed law enforcement officer, it's still okay to shoot those people because the Second Amendment gives him the right to carry a gun, even though he's a criminal. Do you know how absurd that sounds? It's ridiculous. But okay, so be it. But you'll never convince me. And I'm not going to, I am not going to stand for this. And I continue to write to my representative, regardless of whatever the excuses are. You're the person we elected. I'm going to write to you. I'm going to email you. I'm going to send you letters. I'm going to let you know that you're not just sitting there collecting a paycheck and making decisions that affect my life, and I'm just a bump on the log. That's not me. Okay, that's not me. But it's completely and utterly absurd for a person to say that the Second Amendment is okay, and that when soon as someone says the word gun control, you want to pull out the Second Amendment. Well, I'm sorry to say, folks, but the Second Amendment does not guarantee you the right to kill as many people as you possibly can with any type of weapon, be it a gun, a knife, or a fishing rod, quite frankly, or a bow and arrow, or whatever the weapon is. It does not guarantee you the right to do that. And it's not for that purpose. So put the Second Amendment away. We're not talking about destroying the Second Amendment. We're talking about keeping guns out of the hands of folks who have no business having guns in the first place. And the biggest problem is that the entire United States of America is flooded with too many guns. There are too many guns. And I had a question for Smith & Wesson. I'm wondering, why do you keep manufacturing all of these weapons over and over and over? And then you run the business like you're competing against Uzi. You're competing against the whatever the hell the company is that makes these assault rifles. And by the way, folks, the AR-15s and the AK-47s were initially intended to be military weapons. They were used by military personnel because in the case of armies going into hostile environments that, regardless of who made those political decisions to make the country fight against each other, that is not my business. My point is that these weapons were designed for military personnel because they were designed for them to win the war by killing as many as possible or getting as many as enemy forces to surrender as possible. That is why these weapons were in the hands of the military. Just like C4 is a military grade explosive, but yet we have people out here who have gained access to C4, which is a military explosive. It was not designed for civilian use. So why are we hiding behind this stuff? Why are we trying to protect this stuff when it's not for the purpose that it was intended for? It wasn't intended for that. Honestly speaking, I wish they really had never even invented the stuff, but it was designed for military use. So that's what it was designed for. Enough said. So on that point of the mass shootings, I am not, and I don't care what anyone says on here, I am not the one who is going to say, it's okay, We're fine. Oh, mass shootings are nothing because mass shootings have been going on for years. You remember when President Obama was in and there were mass shootings? There was one at Georgia Tech, Columbine, I believe. I don't believe that was under Obama, but I'm not sure because I'm just so angry right now. I'm not really thinking about that history right now. I'm just trying to bring out a point. And some people might be surprised when I say the word angry because I appear to be very calm, but inside I'm boiling mad because I keep hearing these stupid comments and it's ridiculous. But again, I'm not trying to censor anyone because I don't have the ability to do that. I'm just saying that I just think that sometimes people's comments just don't reflect reality. They just don't. And I'm sorry for moving around, but I'm just trying to get my proper position. So we're going to move on. Now we're going to move on from the mass shootings in Texas. But before I move on from that, I just want to say that my heart and my condolences go out to the families of all of the folks who were shot, the ones who were killed, and as well as the ones who were injured. I extend my prayers. I went to church yesterday and I did pray for the families of all those involved in the shootings in El Paso, Texas, as well as Dayton, Ohio, but also praying across the country for all those folks who over the last 50 years or so have lost their lives. We have what we call a murder rate in our city, just like in other cities. I heard a story where Chicago had 579 shootings. And then someone pointed out to me, well, but Chicago has over 2 million and some people. And I said, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where I live, has 1.5 million estimated residents, and we had over 300 and some shootings. So my point is that I'm not looking at statistics like that in the sense of, okay, well, we should expect that Chicago should have 579 shootings because they have more people there. That's ridiculous to even compare that. It's absurd, and I'm not doing it. I'm not saying, oh, it's okay because Chicago's a bigger city, so if they have 579, you should expect that because they got too many. No. That's absurd. It's unreasonable and it's absurd. So I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that one. I've also had conversations with folks and I bring up the shootings between drug dealers, and we used to have a really bad mob problem here, but the mobsters would shoot each other. So everybody said, oh, that's okay because they're shooting each other and they're not shooting innocent people. But come on, folks, it's absurd. There's no reason for anyone to be shooting anyone. It's just that we just have too much gun availability and gun proliferation in this country that it is causing these people to just pick up the gun and settle whatever it is that they're dealing with instead of talking things out like we used to do back when I was a kid. Back when I was 16, 17, 15, we had like man-to-man fights. Like I wasn't even a grown man, I was a kid. But if we had a beef, we duked it out and then we were done. Famous story. There was a guy on my block and I didn't even have a beef with the guy, but these girls across the street, they had some kind of issue between me and my sisters. So they didn't like us. They called us goody two-shoes and all this nonsense. And so they looked at him. This was one of those weird things. They looked at him and looked at me, and I was, because I'm like 6'2", and this kid was about 5'9". So he was the tallest male that was there. And these two idiot women said, oh, I think you guys should fight. But to make it even more absurd, but to save face, because now I don't want to look like a punk in my own neighborhood. So I'm reduced to trying to duke it out with some kid over them. But it only took one punch to deal with it. It was one boop, pop to the nose, boom, it was over. He ran home. His mom came up, made him apologize because She taught him that you don't fight people for stupidity. You don't fight people for stupid reasons. But my point about that fight was we had the Duke out and then we became friends. And he never held a grudge and said, well, when I see Teddy, when he gets in his 20s and 30s, if I see him on the street, I'm going to shoot him because I remember that incident back when we were kids, when we fought. No, when we fought, it was over. We were done with it. We didn't have a beef. I see people getting shot now for stepping on someone's toe by accident. You're in a crowded club with hundreds of people in a dance hall, and you bump some guy, and he goes, what did you bump me for? And you go, I'm sorry, my man, it was an accident. I didn't mean it. Oh, no, F that. No, you disrespected me. What? I bumped into you by accident. What are you talking about? And he's ready to shoot you. Does that make sense? Does the Second Amendment have anything to do with that? Absolutely not. It's absurd. So I'm not buying into that. Okay, one last point, and then I'm going to leave this. I'm going to stop beating this horse. Okay, so President Trump and Representative Cummings had a beef about Baltimore. Okay, now this might get a little complicated for some folks, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. And I'm going to say it directly and as firmly and fairly as I can say it. But the fact of the matter is that the conditions in Baltimore are not, repeat, not the direct fault of one person. Now, who that one person is, you pick. Because I'm not going to say, oh, it's not Elijah Cummings' fault, because then you hear all the people saying, well, he's been in there for 30 years. He hasn't done anything. No. But I'm going to say it's not the fault of one person, and I'm going to say it's the fault of many people. The conditions in Baltimore, the conditions in Philadelphia, the conditions in New York, the conditions in Chicago, conditions in LA, conditions in Compton, conditions in New Mexico, conditions in Arkansas, all are the result of years and years of neglect, years of blight, years of poverty, years of sheer, just plain ignorance. And it came from both Republican and Democratic administrations. I'm going to get more specific. In my city specifically, I watched Republican governor for 8 years fight the Democratic mayor against gun control, against increasing education spending, increasing funding for the school district, and they used a bunch of nonsensical excuses. And the excuses were that, the school district funds, we dispersed funds to them and it was mismanaged, so we're not going to give them any more money. So then their solution was the state house made a recommendation, or not even a recommendation, they made a resolution and passed a law called the School Reform Law, and they actually came up with what they call the School Reform Commission, and they took over. They came in and took over. And I was okay with that, even though local control of schools should have been kept under local control. But I wasn't too upset with that, because my mantra is, if you're going to give me money and you feel that I mismanaged the money, then you come in and you watch over the money. So then if the money disappears again or it's mismanaged, it's your fault, because now you're monitoring it. You're in control of it. You're in charge of it. You put people in charge. If the money got stolen or mismanaged, it's your fault. It's not my fault. As the mayor, it's not my fault. So I didn't have a problem with that. The problem I have is that once they did that, they started trying to point the finger of blame away from themselves. And I said, no, because you took over. It's your fault. It's your responsibility. Fine. I'm okay with that. So in the meantime, We then voted in a Democratic mayor and a Democratic governor. But yet we still had a majority Republican legislature who refused, because in our particular region of the world, we are what is called a city of the first class. And they have all these special rules as to far as, like, we can't pass our own gun control laws, and we have to go through them if we want to do any type of it has to be passed through them. And they are saying no because the NRA had them bought and paid for, basically. Had them under control. So it was like we weren't going to get it. And they said, oh, we've had the record homicide rates. I mean, at one point, I think we had 500 and something murders one year. I can't remember exactly the year that it was, but it was a rate that had never been set before, and it was out of control. And they tried to do something about it, and the legislature said no. They said no. So we continued to deal. So then the police commissioner tried to implement reforms and tried to do things. And we had the broken windows theories. We had community policing. Community policing has been batted back and forth for years. And even I worked with some commanders who absolutely did not even buy into the community policing concept. They said, we don't believe in this crap. But they had to implement certain reforms because it was ordered from above, and they had no say, so they had to implement it, but they didn't like it. But the community policing concept, I've always been okay with that, because in my patrol days, I met a lot of people, and I had a lot of people that really gave me information that was really helpful. They genuinely liked me as a police officer, and they gave me information that they wouldn't have given to other police officers, because I was engaged in the community, even though I wasn't walking a footbeat or anything. But the footbeat officers really made the connections, because the thing is, if you see the same officer every single day, even if it's 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, every day for the 365 days a year, there's going to be some contact made. You're going to make friends. You're going to make people feel comfortable seeing you there as a crime prevention type of thing. And not only that, but also as a personable, approachable person that someone can talk to discuss issues that are affecting the community. So people welcomed that. And then we had community relations officers in each district that went out and talked to people and made contacts. And we did proactive stuff to try to tamp stuff down, to keep crime down, to keep residents aware of things that they could do to keep their neighborhood safe, things that they, anonymous lines that they could call. Some officers even gave people their cell phone numbers to call them directly and personally to deal with issues. So there are things that the police do that the majority of people in the country don't even realize, that a lot of these police officers make contacts with people that can be very, very helpful in a lot of situations. We had a police officer who was killed off duty, and there was an officer who had gained enough information to bring in the suspects because the trail had gotten cold. But he called certain people that he knew, and he was able to effect the arrest of the killer of a police officer. So, and not only that, but solved the crime of a guy who killed his own cousin. So it wasn't just a police officer, but it was a regular person too, because everybody says, oh, you're only concerned about police. But no, we're concerned about everybody. We don't want anybody killed, honestly. I mean, I'm retired now, so I'm saying we in the sense of when I was on the force, I didn't want to see that happen. And so I felt as though I was a shield. And even though I knew that there was the possibility that I could get killed myself, or shot or wounded or burned up in a fire or anything doing my job, but that was my job. And those were things that we were told at the police academy, that these are things that could happen to you. These are things that have happened to other police officers who have come through this academy. But this is a reality of the situation because you are the only thing standing between chaos and community. Chaos and community. Just think about that. But I digressed a little bit. But I wanted to get back to the funding issue. The federal funding issue. And then I'm going to leave this alone, I promise. But the point was that the issue is that President Trump says that he's sent $16 billion, 16 point some billion dollars over to Baltimore just in 2018 alone, and they want to know where this money went, and they think that it was stolen or mismanaged or wasted. He said two things: stolen or wasted, which is both of them are absurd, and I'll explain why. Number one, when federal funds are dispersed, they are dispersed for specific reasons. This money can only be spent for these specific purposes. Okay, for instance, when the Mass Transit Administration sends out federal funds to cities' mass transit agencies, those funds are designed specifically to purchase transit vehicles. Okay, so the government pays 80% of the bill. The mass transit agency pays the other 20%. So we know where that money went. We already know. It went, look at those bright new shiny buses that you see riding up and down your neighborhood streets. So we know this. When the Federal Highway Administration sends out federal funds to cities and states, this money is dispersed through either the Department of Transportation in those states or even through the streets department of the local government. And this money is used to fix roads, so when the highway gets milled and then the new asphalt is put down, that is money from federal funds. But also that money comes from when you pay gasoline taxes. That money goes for roads and bridges. But how come we still have all these places where roads and bridges, specifically bridges, are either, and they have this terminology, I'm not going to say it verbatim word for word, so if I get it wrong, it's okay. But they say either dangerous or either severely dangerous or to the point that they have to close the bridge down because it's too dangerous for even traffic to drive over it at all. But a lot of roads and bridges are crumbling. But we keep raising these gasoline taxes and keep raising them. And guess what? Republican presidents were there when these they had to sign these bills when they were passed by the House and Senate to raise these taxes, to raise these gasoline taxes. And the Republicans signed it and the Democrats signed it. So they're both responsible as well for these things. But I want to get specifically to Baltimore and the housing situation because it's not just in Baltimore. It's in New York. It's in Philadelphia. It's LA. It's Chicago. It's Detroit, Flint. It's all these cities where you have the same exact cycle going on. You have abandoned properties. You have drugs. You have homelessness. You have poverty. You have low wages. You have apathy from the residents. But it's a little more technical when it comes to the housing because here's the problem. When you see a vacant house, it's not just because it's a vacant house that the city just didn't give a damn about. What happens is that these homes are privately owned by people like you and me. They're owned. And what happens is sometimes folks don't get married and have kids, and it's just them that own this property. And when that person passes away, what happens? That property starts to decay. When you live in your home is a living, breathing thing in a sense. It's not a literal sense in the sense of people saying, oh, it breathes. No, what I'm saying is that you take care of it, you paint it, you wash the walls, you cut the grass, You do things, you point the bricks, you do all these things to keep the home in a condition that's livable. And so when that stops happening, the house starts to fall apart. And I heard all the stuff. It doesn't matter what city it is. Baltimore is no more rat infested, worse hellhole than any other city. It's all the same. Forgive me, but it's all the same. Because the reality is that people die. Then you get the kids like who probably weren't taught that you're supposed to pay the property taxes, or don't realize that you're supposed to pay the property taxes to upkeep the property. And I can point to people that I know specifically, which I won't name any names, but I know people specifically that exact thing happened, and the property fell into disrepair, and it ended up with crumbling bricks and things falling out off the facade because it wasn't being taken care of. And it's a complex issue, folks. It's not just because Washington, D.C. sent money after it and said, fix it. It just doesn't work that way. The reality is that it's a complex problem because there are rules and laws in place to protect homeowners. And the unintended consequence is that when someone passes away and the property falls into disrepair, you can't just go in and seize the property. It has to be done through a lien being placed first for failure to pay property taxes. Then it has to go to sheriff's cell. And this process takes a while. So meantime, that property sits vacant. It's a reality. And the city says, well, we sent out, we have what we call Department of Licenses and Inspections, and they go out and seal these properties that people complain about. I remember when I was on the force, they had a blitz one time, and I worked on the blitz that day. And what the blitz was is that they used the PPD helicopter to survey these particular areas, and they went into all of these particular neighborhoods. I spent an entire 8-hour shift driving from neighborhood to neighborhood, from South Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, Northeast Philadelphia. I was all over this entire city with this blitz crew from the Department of Streets and Department of Licenses and Inspections. And what they did was they identified these properties through city records where these folks hadn't paid their taxes in years. There was a registered owner, but no one had paid the taxes. No one paid the water bill. No one paid the electric bill. No one paid the gas bill. The property was abandoned. And what they did was they sealed these properties up. And then once the city placed the liens on the property, they were then sold at sheriff's sales. So the city, under a Democratic administration, by the way, but they did this. They did this, and they continue to do this blitz from time to time, but it's expensive because it takes all day. It takes a long time because they have to survey, and they have to have a helicopter go over, and they have to make sure that if the roof is not in good condition, that has to be dealt with, because that could cause the collapse of the property through moisture from the rain and the heavy snow and ice and stuff coming down into the property and rotting the beams and rotting the support beams most of all, and that's what causes the property to collapse. But these are complex issues, folks. It's not just simple of throwing a few. And I'm trivializing it by saying throwing a few billion. And I don't mean that in that way. I'm saying you can't just pay your way out of it. It's a complex problem. And then on top of that, you still have this vicious cycle surrounding that. You got the drugs, and you got the people who are strung out on drugs, and you got them breaking into people's homes, and you have people being shot. It's just a vicious cycle. So the solutions, people can sit around round tables and think of solutions all day. That's great. But at the end of the day, can we really solve the problem? Eventually at some point, but we have to keep fixing. We have to keep fixing. We have to keep sealing. We have to keep selling. We have to keep moving. We just have to keep doing it. We have to keep sending crews out, sending city crews out to cut the weeds down, so that one of the biggest things that happens is when weeds collect and they start to grow and they really become crowded and people throw trash and garbage in there, that's where the rats come from, partially. And then the other thing is that so much construction is being booming right now that they're opening up the ground and they're pouring these new foundations and all this stuff, but they're disturbing, because a lot of these rats, of course, we know rats live underground. We know this, but by them doing all this development and building and opening grounds, it's unearthing these things to come out into the public. So that's why we're getting all these rats, but that's only part of it. It's like the houses have been, I mean, if you look, and then here's my question. If you've seen abandoned property, if you've seen an abandoned property in some of these cities, I have always scratched my head over this. How come we keep finding bags of trash, baby diapers, garbage, stuff that people use, wrappers of candies, pizza boxes? Why do we find all this stuff in abandoned properties? Are people walking up to the property and just throwing trash in? Like, this is a question I've never been able to figure out an answer to. Like, why is, if you look, I guarantee you, any one of the cities that I named, or any city, major city in the United States, you can walk past an abandoned property, and I guarantee you, if the property is open and you can see through the front door or whatever, you will see trash or baby diapers. I've seen it all, and I'm going, when I was on patrol, I could never figure it out. I was like, who is doing this? Who's going into these homes and doing this? And you think that's helping? Like, well, the trash isn't on the street, but then, so there's rats and stuff in those properties. So what are you talking about? And you're going to say one man should have cleaned all this up? Are you insane? That's not even possible. Even in 30 years, that's not possible. But yet we have nutty people out here saying stuff like that. It's just absurd. So I want to close this video because I've been talking for like 45 minutes and it's really absurd. I don't usually make videos longer than 10 minutes. And I just, but this was really a compilation, I'll say, video. But I just wanted to address this because it bugged me, because I had a front row seat to a lot of the problems that plague American cities today, and I just wanted to speak out on it. And having said that, have a good evening.